Before we begin, let's just preface by saying this is my own recipe on how to make sourdough at home, and I've created this to be the most foolproof way to do it. So if you're using a stand mixer, go ahead and measure out 500 grams of bread flour in your mixing bowl. You can use all-purpose flour as well, or any flour if you want. Next, you're going to take a separate bowl and you're going to zero out your scale, and you're going to basically add 250 grams of lukewarm water. Tap water is fine, bottled water, whatever you have works. If you want to be super specific, you're looking for 25 to 27 Celsius. So next, zero out your scale again. With the same bowl, you're going to want to add your starter. Ideally, you want to use your starter when it's at the peak, when it's at the rise right before it's going to deflate again. To make sure it's ready to use, just do the float test so you can see it's floating there. And then go ahead and add 150 grams of your starter to that water. If you go over a couple grams, it's not a big deal, don't stress about it. Next, you're going to want to mix the starter and dilute it into the water. You're basically looking for consistent soup. You don't want any chunks in there of starter. It only takes a couple seconds to do this. As you can see, I'm still mixing there. And then what you're going to want to do is, once it's fully combined, just dump it into the flour bowl right away. So go ahead and grab your stand mixer now. If you're doing this by hand, you can totally knead this by hand as well. It's just going to take you probably 3 to 4 minutes for this next step. So using the stand mixer, grab the dough hook and then just attach it to your mixer, obviously. And then basically set it to speed 2 on most KitchenAid stand mixers, or any stand mixer really. And then what you're looking for is that dough consistency there. You just basically, you should still see some flour in there, but you don't want it to be a full dough yet. Now you're gonna grab another bowl, you're gonna weigh out 25 grams of water, same thing, lukewarm. And then with that, you're gonna add 10 to 15 grams of salt. It's really personal preference. If you have a grinder, go ahead and use that. It just makes dissolving the salt a lot easier. I just don't want to grind out 12 grams of salt, so I used rock salt, sea salt basically, and I'm just diluting it by hand. So this part takes a little bit of time. So you can see the dough is not really a dough yet, but you just kind of soaked up all the water. So you're gonna add the salt water to your dough mix now. And you're gonna turn your mixer back on to speed 2. And you're gonna basically let that run for about 8 to 10 minutes, or until you get some sort of consistent dough that looks like pizza dough. If you're doing this by hand, it will take you probably 10 minutes. And you're basically just gonna keep kneading until you get a dough that looks like that. So I'm transferring the dough into a second bowl right now. What I didn't show you guys is I'm making 2 loaves. So you can totally leave the dough in the mixing bowl for the first part of the proofing stage. But because I'm making 2, I need that mixing bowl to mix my second batter. So essentially this stage is what they call the stretch and fold. What you want to do is you're going to do this for a period of about 2 hours. Now, I've had success without even doing this and just going straight to proofing. It's really personal preference. So basically you saran wrap or plastic wrap your bowl, put it in the oven with the light on, and just basically every half an hour for 2 hours, you're going to lift each corner and pretend this is a square. Essentially do quarter turns and lift each corner up as far as you can without tearing the dough, and then folding it right on top. And then basically what this does is develops gluten, and like I said, you're going to do this 4 times over the course of 2 hours. So now I've got my proofing basket, and I'm going to transfer it to my actual proofing basket, and I'm flouring the liner. Don't use all-purpose or any sort of bread flour or something, I find it absorbs and actually makes it more sticky. This is the part that you need to flour your countertop or your working space. Moisten your hands a little bit so the dough doesn't stick to your hands. You're basically going to plop it down onto the countertop or your working surface, and what you want to do is you're going to try to shape this now. So as you can see, it's obviously grown since the last shot, and you're basically just going to do the same thing, fold over technique, all four corners, and you want to get that seam on the bottom. So now I'm rolling it into a round ball, and the idea here is to tighten up the bottom, and that's why you see me dragging it there. And then what you want to do is put that in your basket. Ideally you flip it the other way and you put your seam facing up. I did not do it on that one. It's not a big deal, it just won't look as pretty. And then it's always a good idea to coat a light coating of flour on the top so that it does not stick to the saran wrap or plastic wrap. Basically, you're going to pop that into the oven for about 4 to 6 hours. You're going to leave the light on and you're just going to let that proof. Once your bread has proofed, you're going to want to take it out of the oven and turn the oven on to preheat it to 500 Fahrenheit. Next step you're going to want to do when your oven is preheated. So right now I'm taking the saran wrap off. This is the second dough I made. I'm just showing you that you don't need a proofing basket if you don't have one. Everyone should have some sort of bowl at home. I greased this bowl with olive oil to prevent it from sticking, so you can see it slowly releasing. You want to be gentle with this part, just not to deflate the dough. And then I put it on parchment paper only because it makes transferring to the Dutch oven a lot easier. So you can see I'm trying to flatten out the parchment paper. You don't need to do this, but I find that if it's flat, you're not going to have those ridges in your dough or your final bread. I'm just cutting off the excess there so they don't burn, because 500 Fahrenheit is pretty hot. So like I said, this part, your oven should be preheated so you can put this right in the oven right away. I find that if you're ready to go, the bread does not have time to deflate as much just from all the moving. So now grab a razor blade and you get fancy with this, but if you're gonna score it, you need to commit and put more pressure than you think, but don't go crazy with it. So this is where you can do designs or just do one straight line right down the middle. This just helps with the bread breaking and crusting. So now you're going to put your bread in the oven. Try to aim for the middle of the oven. Like I say, I made 2 breads, but for the purpose of the video, I'm just showing you the one going in there. You're going to set 2 timers. My oven has 2 timers built in, which is very convenient, but if you don't have one, that's fine. Use your microwave. So the first timer, you want to set it to 25 minutes. The second timer, you're going to set it to 35 minutes. And the idea is you're going to bake it for 25 minutes with the lid on, and then an extra 10 minutes without the lid on, just to form the crust. So now you can see that the first timer went off. I have the 2 buns going in there. So I'm going to take the lid off on both. And now this is where the crust is going to start baking, and you're going to get that nice dark deep crust. So basically I'm pulling it out. Here's the final product. You're going to want to take it out of the pans right away and try to put the bread on a drying rack just to prevent any sort of moisture buildup. So you can see I have a nice deep dark color. I like 10 minutes extra baking because it doesn't make the crust super thick, and as the days go by, that super thick crust, if it's too crusty, it becomes really hard to chew. So you can see it looks pretty nice there. It's a nice gold color. It's really crispy. Turned out pretty nice actually. Here you see me cutting it up. So basically this is what you're waiting for. I've used bread flour, and like I said, this is the easiest way to do it. There's no huge air holes or anything like that, no big crumb. You see a couple bigger holes there, but overall it tastes phenomenal.